in Bulgaria. Welcome, Miro.
Thank you. Can we start? So if I show you a piece of code, does this look like PHP? Why doesn't it look like PHP? It should be same as public function. Can we be less verbose? PHP is actually pretty verbose. So maybe this is a bad example. Let's look at a method that's more descriptive. So this doesn't fit. And just to show you the numbers, that's the 80th character. So I either have to pick being descriptive in the metadata or in the method names. And I would actually prefer to have better naming of the methods instead of the metadata. Maybe we can create something like this. A simple getter that will say, hey, just return the user ID instead of all of the code down here. Maybe we can do C# style getters and setters, which would behave same like this. So 2 lines instead of 15. But upgrading PHP as a language is really not easy. So when we are talking about languages, one really important thing is who's behind it. JavaScript has Google, Rust has Mozilla, C#, F#, TypeScript have Microsoft behind. Elixir has Jose Vadim's company, I'm not sure of the name, sorry. Erlang has Ericsson behind it. Python has a foundation. PHP has nothing. Almost no funding. So there are some companies that employ core PHP developers, like Etsy has Rasmus, JetBrains has Nikita Popov. I know that Dimitri was in RogueWave/Zend. So it's really hard to get new features in, often because core developers are actually not PHP developers. PHP as a language is done in C. I don't do C. I'm really not good in C. I guess a lot of you are not good in C. Who's here good in C? Okay, a few hands. And on the other side, a lot of core PHP developers are actually not doing PHP. You can often hear them, they haven't created something in PHP for a decade. So there's a big void between us that core devs don't want new features. They want to just maintain the current ones. Sometimes we, as the users, want to see new things. And I'm really grateful to Nikita because he has been bringing a lot of new features in, but it shouldn't be only one person. So if we look at some other examples, from other languages, about 8 or 9 years, somebody brought CoffeeScript to JavaScript because they needed a less verbose JavaScript. So the left side is CoffeeScript that will be transpiled into JavaScript. So the left and the right side are the same. There's TypeScript and JavaScript nowadays. Because JavaScript doesn't support the type system, Microsoft built TypeScript, which transpiles to JavaScript. So you get the type checking parts there. Elixir and Erlang are really interesting. So who here knows Erlang? Heard of Erlang? Okay, who here heard of Elixir? Okay, so Erlang as a language, as a virtual machine was built 30, 40 years ago. It was mostly used in Ericsson for phone, for telecommunications. And Jose Valim, like maybe 5 or 10 years ago, decided, hey, I love Ruby, I love Elixir, I love Ruby, I love Erlang. Can we bring Ruby syntax to Erlang VM? So he brought us Elixir, which has Ruby syntax that's compiled into Erlang VM. So if you're writing Erlang or Elixir, they can communicate. So Elixir is not transpiled to Erlang as a language, but as Erlang as a virtual machine. So can we transpile PHP? My name is Miro Svrtan. You can find me on Twitter using this handle. So I guess most of you are not aware what compiler is, so I'm going to give you a minute. And this is the definition of a transpiler. So just too long didn't read. Compiler is getting the code from stage A to stage B, from language A to language B. Mostly when we say compilers, we think about source code being compiled to machine language. Transpilers are a subgroup of compilers, and but they don't do machine code, they do source code to source code. So CoffeeScript, TypeScript are transpiled, Elixir is compiled. And maybe some of you heard of this thing. So it's not that we're not using already transpilers or compilers. You know what HHVM is? Okay, so there have been a few hands. So HHVM was a Facebook's idea of making PHP fast, because PHP isn't that fast. So their first iteration was, we're going to take the PHP code, we're going to transpile it to C++, and then we're going to compile it. With that, they got a lot of speed, but it was error-prone. In the next iteration, they decided to build it as a virtual machine, as a PHP engine, and also as a language. So they created Hack, which was a superset of PHP having new features. PHP, but you could still use and call PHP functions. I'm not going to go too detailed into this. You can watch Sarah MG had a really great talk about how HHVM influenced PHP, because without HHVM, we wouldn't have PHP 7. And a lot of the performance there came with the ideas from the HHVM. Also, you can learn more about the HHVM and Hack on her other talk. So, what is a compiler? So compiler has a few steps. It does the lexical, the syntax, and the semantic analysis, and then does the code generation. So let me first explain what the lexical analysis is. It's going to convert the source code into tokens. So for instance, on the left side, you have the PHP. On the right side, you have the tokens. This is just a sample of the tokens from the namespace up, because I just couldn't fit all of them at once. So we are then going to use these tokens in the syntax analysis part. We're going to check that the code construct, the code structure is right, and we're going to build the abstract syntax tree. So what does the syntax analysis do? I have the proper code, I have the broken code. So you can't put a return after a value. It should be return something, not something return. You can't put function at the beginning of the definition. It has to be at the end. So that's the part of the syntax analysis where it checks that the code is properly set up. The third part is semantic analysis. It does additional code checks. So for PHP, I'm not going to go into details, but for other languages, it's going to do type checking. So is an integer, is a float is a string, and checks that during the compile time for errors. If you want to know more about abstract syntax tree, I recommend James's talk. He's here in the first row, so you can even poke him after the talk, or you can just watch it on YouTube. Yeah, he's not too happy with the poke him after the talk. Really important library in PHP is Nikit's PHP parser. So Nikita Popov is one of the core developers. For a lot of new features that we got, that's his fault. And we should be all very thankful to him. So his parser is done by doing the lexical analysis with using the token get all from PHP. So it's an internal PHP method. And then he brought syntax semantic analysis and code generation by himself. So I'm going to start talking about some failures, and those are mainly mine. So I started with a simple code generator. If you've been to Stefan's talk just before, he showed you a lot of DTO objects, which I hated doing by hand. So I created a small code generator that had a config and that would generate those files out. It worked great until it needed additional features outside of, there's a class that has properties and simple getters or setters. So the next step I tried to do was lexing, parsing, and code generation. So that my source code can be in another language that's not PHP, that's my language, my DSL, and would support PHP, so I could transfer all of it there, move it, and then transpile it back to PHP. First idea I built in Rust, and it was a complete failure. So PHP is so forgiving. There are so many different ways to access a property, create a variable, access a method, that's trying to build the build the whole compiler was just too hard. I had so many errors. So in the second iteration, I dropped Rust as an idea and decided to go with Nikit's PHP parser, but creating the custom lexer. Why? If I want pub and fn as words to be parsed, I need to create a custom lexer because the PHP one will throw an error because it doesn't know what it is. So everything that my lexer should do is just create the tokens for pubfn and public function the same way. I'm working on it. It's nowhere close to the end, but there are problems with custom lexers in PHP. So first and foremost, I'm not a parser person. So I don't know all the details, all the best practices, all the good practices even. So I'm just playing with it. But the main issue is that I have to do the full PHP support, which for Lexer is actually not that hard in comparison to whole compiler, because I just need to generate the tokens. But it's going to be really slow. PHP is extremely slow in comparison to native C functions, to the native token get all. Maybe I'll build the custom legs are in Rust. Rust is extremely fast, but then I'm creating the problem that we started with. Because now you need to learn Rust to add something so that it would work. But maybe for the Lexer part, that would work because Lexer is just creating the tokens, not much more. But I'm waiting for the PHP 7.4 FFI support. So until then, I'm not going to go further. But some other were actually more successful than me. But they're not doing transpiling or compiling, just the pre-processing. So Christopher Pitt has done the pre, which supports some nice features that can help you out quickly build out your code, like short closures, generics, async, parameter, and property loaders. Very interesting. They are using the macro system of the PHP to get all of this done. So what they do is they don't support the PHP. They just generate the code. There's another project that started this summer by Nuno Maduro, the PHP Plus. It has similar features. It does the similar thing, but he's trying to do more in sense of read-only properties, collections, simpler getters. Both the Pre and the PHP Plus are using YAI by Marcio Almada. I'm sorry if I said his name wrong. And that's the compiler doing all of the work there. So for instance, I love this example from YAI, where you can easily stop using this and just say $A, $B, $C. And YAI would transform that into this A, this B, and this C. Yeah, I know it's not a lot of changes, but if you have a lot of chained methods or methods that are coming from that object, this can save some space and make it more readable. We also have Zephyr. Anybody here using Falcon? Okay. Much more than expected. So Falcon is a PHP framework written as a C extension. So it's extremely fast. And one of the consequences of it was they needed to bring their own language to create more extensions. Because, again, to write a PHP extension, you need to be a C developer, which PHP developers are usually not. So by using Zephyr, you can write, let's say, PHP that will be compiled into C that then you can run as an extension. Really interesting idea. I'm not sure I'm the fan of building an extension, but it looks really interesting. But there are two big problems. One is, whatever we build as the new language, we needed the IDE support. We already have JetBrains, Visual Studio Codes, Atoms, Sublimes, and everything else. But who would like to switch to a language that has no IDE support? That's going to be really painful. On the other hand, the performance is the issue, because there must be a step where you're changing your source code to something else, then to PHP, then you would run them there. But on the other hand, who's here using Twig? Blade, Smarty? You're already transpiling to PHP. All of them are transpilers. They have their own DSL. They created the PHP templates that your framework then use. So we have some support already there. But let's go into what we can get by transpiling. So this is a simple DTO with 4 properties. You see that I couldn't have fitted the 5th one in. Why don't we have a simple structure? This should be equal. And just to give you how different A and B are, this is the new structure. That makes it much more readable and enjoyable, at least for me. So if we take a similar structure, I removed all of the other properties. We can target different PHP versions. So here we don't have the Scholar type support because it's for pre-PHP 7.0. For 7.0 to 7.3, we can add it, but we can't have property types. If we're targeting 7.4, we can easily just add the types. So our source code doesn't change, okay? If we think of this as the source code, if we don't think of PHP 5 as the source code, but the other language, we can easily target new versions of PHP as they are coming up. There was a really great RFC that never passed, well, that was never finished, about immutability. The idea was that you can build an immutable class by saying, hey, you need the constructor and you need the public properties. So once the object is constructed, you cannot change their values. Maybe this would be the new syntax. That's a bit less to get in. PHP has no enum support, native enum support. So what we often have to do is use libraries like myclabs enum or some others, which are very verbose. Because maybe our enums have to look something like this. Why wouldn't this be our new enum? We can pick any of these 3 ideas. I'm not saying which one is the good, the bad, or the ugly. Can we add the match operator? It's similar to switch, but it's less verbose. So if this is the value, return this, return this, return this, return this, which is actually similar to this. But it gets better if you have more than one operator in, more than one value you're matching, when you're matching by A, B, and C. Anybody remembers pipe operator RFC? Anybody knows what a pipe operator is? Okay. So, what we usually have to do in PHP is function, result, function, another result, function, another result, return something. SarMG suggested the pipe operator. I think the suggestion was based on Elixir pipe operator. And this is the idea. I think that the upper version is much more readable. It says, hey, here's a string, shove it to the next method as the first argument. The result of that goes as the first argument to the second. Then the result of that goes as the first argument down. For me, this is much more readable. But to be honest, the resulting PHP code would look like this. Because you have to call the methods in the opposite order. Because this is the first one, then the second one, then the third one. Which looks a bit weird, to be honest. So let's do a short recap. I'm not saying that this is the way to go. I don't have a better suggestion. If you have, please comment in the Q&A section. I think that we have to change PHP. PHP is getting older. It's losing a lot of its momentum for years now, and I don't see it getting better. With the corporate sponsorships, other languages are able to evolve much faster. I think this might be a nice way to show to the core developers, hey, this is a popular feature. Can you build it into the language? Thank you. I would love if you would leave me some feedback on JoinedIn. This is my first time doing this talk on a conference. Any questions? There's here one.
Microphone.
I think Marco is jealous that I didn't mention him at any point.
So transpiling brings the expressiveness, but it also brings the problem that all the existing tooling does no longer work, which is mostly why tools like CoffeeScript were abandoned, because they created their own ecosystem. When do you think you can do the cut and say, now we need a transpiler because the value is here?
Okay, so I wouldn't go with a completely new language. I would support PHP and then add more features. So if you can just copy all of your PHP code into the folder, or just run the transpiler across all of your PHP files and generate the new PHP files somewhere else, that's good enough. In my case, for now, because I'm just trying to do the first step. I'm not sure that doing the completely new language and breaking everything that we currently have will make it better. It will just alienate everybody that's now on PHP. That's it? Again, thank you. If you have any more questions, I'm going to be around. Feel free to ping me. Thank you.